3 years after their children drove away and didn't look back, a county sedan pulled up to a forgotten dirt road. The mayor of Harlan County stepped out. He walked up a salvaged brick path. He knocked on the door of a $15 house.
I'm prepared to offer $1 million.
The house they had lived in for 31 years was not a grand house. It had a sagging front porch and a kitchen where the linoleum had bubbled up in one corner since 1997. Tom had always meant to fix it. He never did. There were marks on the doorframe in the hallway, pencil lines and dates, where he and Debbie had measured their children as they grew. Julio had reached 5'11" by the time he was 16. Marina had stopped letting them measure her at 14, embarrassed by it. But Debbie had snuck in one last mark anyway when Marina was sleeping. That house was gone now. Not in a fire, not in a flood. Gone in a way that is somehow worse than both of those things. It was sold. Sold by Julio and Marina, their own children, after a series of bad decisions, a failed business, and a quiet mountain of debt that Tom and Debbie did not fully understand until the paperwork was already signed. Julio had framed it the way people frame things when they know they are doing something wrong, but need to believe otherwise. He sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Tom had taught him to play chess, where Debbie had helped him with homework until midnight, and he said, "Dad, you two are getting older. This is the practical decision. The house is too big for just the two of you. The maintenance alone is killing you. And honestly, we need the capital to restructure. It's not like we're abandoning you. We're being realistic." Tom said nothing for a long time. He looked at the bubbled linoleum in the corner. Marina did not come to that meeting. She sent a text message. It said, "Dad, I talked to Julio. I think he's right. You'll be more comfortable somewhere smaller. Less to worry about. Love you." More comfortable. Less to worry about. What neither of them said, what hung in the air of that kitchen like smoke, was that the money from the house sale was not going toward anything that would benefit Tom and Debbie. It was going toward Julio's restructured debts, toward Marina's second mortgage on a condo she had bought at the peak of a market she did not understand. The children were drowning, and they had found a life raft that happened to be shaped like their parents' home. They were not evil people. That is perhaps the hardest part of this story. They were just frightened people who made the oldest and most human of mistakes. They chose themselves. Tom was 68 years old. He had worked for 34 years in highway maintenance, paving, patching, marking lanes in the dark before dawn so that other people could drive safely to their offices and their children's soccer games. His hands were the kind of hands that told you everything you needed to know about a life. Wide, calloused, permanently stained in the creases with something that soap never quite reached. Debbie was 65. She had been a school cafeteria supervisor for 22 years, and before that she had worked in a laundromat, and before that she had done alterations for a dry cleaner downtown. She was not a quiet woman by nature. She had a loud laugh and opinions about everything. But she had learned, over the years of her marriage, that some silences were more useful than words. She knew when to let Tom be. She knew when the world was too close and he needed space to breathe. She did not know, on the day they left the house on Crestview Road for the last time, how to give herself that same mercy. Julio drove them to the land. He called it the property. It was not a property. It was a strip of forgotten ground on the eastern edge of Harlan County. A flat, weedy rectangle between a defunct drainage ditch and an old access road that nobody used anymore. There were rusted fence posts every 30 feet along the perimeter, but the wire between them had long since collapsed or been stolen. A stand of scrubby pine trees grew along the northern edge, leaning slightly, the way trees lean when the soil beneath them has never been quite right. And on that land, there was a structure. Structure is perhaps the most generous word for it. It had been purchased, and here is where the story gets its name, for $15. $15 at a county clearance auction of surplus and abandoned materials. Julio had found it online. 3 weeks before the house sale closed, while looking for the cheapest possible solution to the problem of where his parents would live. It had originally been some kind of prefabricated equipment shed, or perhaps a hunting shelter. Nobody was entirely sure. The county had acquired it through tax forfeiture from a man who had abandoned the land years ago, and they had auctioned it off as part of a lot with some rusted pipe fittings and a broken water heater. $15. The pipe fittings alone were probably worth more. When Julio pulled up to it that afternoon, with his parents in the back seat of his SUV, the structure stood in the weedy light looking exactly like what it was, something that should have been demolished. The roof was corrugated zinc, dented in multiple places, with a visible patch of rust along the eastern edge where a seam had failed. The walls were plywood over a frame of 2x4s, and the plywood had swelled and cracked in at least 3 places from old moisture. There were 2 windows, one in front, one on the side, both with intact but fogged plastic glazing instead of glass. The door had a padlock on it that Julio had to work at with the key for almost 2 minutes before it finally clicked open. Inside, roughly 220 square feet, the smell of damp wood and something fungal, a concrete floor with a crack running diagonally from the northeast corner, a single bare bulb on a cord from the ceiling, no insulation. Julio said, "I know it needs some work." Tom looked at the crack in the floor. Then he looked at the rust on the ceiling. Then he looked at his son. He said, "Yeah. Just that. Just yeah." Marina was not there. She had sent a housewarming gift 3 days later, a small succulent in a terracotta pot, with a card that said, "Thinking of you both. New beginnings. Love M." The succulent was dead within a week. The pot cracked in the cold. Debbie put it on the windowsill anyway, because it was the only decoration they had. Julio stayed for 40 minutes. He helped Tom carry the 2 suitcases and the 4 boxes that contained the entire portable remainder of their lives. He looked at his phone twice. He hugged Debbie, the kind of hug that is about relieving the hugger more than the hugged, and said, "I'll call you this week. We'll figure out the internet situation." He never sorted out the internet situation. And then he was gone. Tom and Debbie stood outside the $15 house in the late afternoon light, listening to the sound of his car getting smaller and smaller down the old access road, and then nothing. Just wind, just the leaning pines, just the creak of the zinc roof settling. They went inside. That first night, Tom found a bucket in the small closet near the door. The previous owner had apparently known about the leaks, and he positioned it under the worst drip from the ceiling. The dripping was not loud, but in a 220 square foot space in the dark, it was all there was. Debbie had found a rag in one of their boxes. She was on her hands and knees in the corner by the crack in the floor, wiping up a thin film of moisture that had seeped in from the ground. Tom watched her do this for a moment. He said, "You don't have to do that tonight." Debbie kept wiping. "I know," she said. A pause. "Tom." "Yeah. Are we going to be okay?" He sat down on one of the boxes, the one with the kitchen things in it, which creaked under him but held. He said, "I don't know yet." Debbie nodded. She wrung out the rag over the crack. "That's honest," she said. "Yeah. I can work with honest." They slept that night on an air mattress they had brought, with 2 blankets pulled from a box, and the bucket dripping its slow rhythm until about 3 in the morning, when the rain stopped and the dripping slowed and then ceased. Debbie lay awake for a long time after that, listening to Tom breathe, listening to the wind move through the pines, listening to the particular quality of silence that belongs to a place where nobody expects anything from you anymore. She could not decide if that was a terrible thing or the beginning of something else entirely. Tom fixed the roof first. Not all at once. He fixed it corner by corner, week by week, using methods that were not always orthodox, but were always functional. He sourced zinc sheeting from a salvage yard 14 miles away, loading it into a borrowed pickup and driving it back himself. He was 68 years old, and he was up on that roof with a caulking gun and a rubber mallet, and he did not ask for help, and he did not complain about his knees. which had been bad since 2019. Debbie watched him from the ground with her arms folded. "You're going to fall," she said. "I'm not going to fall," Tom said. "You fell off a stepladder in the garage in 2014. That was a completely different situation." "How?" "I was distracted." "By what?" "I don't remember. The point is, I'm not distracted now." He did not fall. By the end of the 3rd month, Tom had insulated the interior walls with salvaged materials that had cost him $67 total. Batting from a building being gutted in the next town, drywall scraps from a job site where he had introduced himself to the foreman and asked if he could take what they were throwing away. The foreman looked at him, this old man with highway work hands and something unyielding in his posture, and said, "Take what you need. I'll be out of your way by noon." He was out by 10:30. Debbie planted the garden in the spring. Not a hobby garden, a survival garden. Tomatoes, zucchini, green beans, sweet peppers, and 4 rows of sweet corn she monitored with the kind of attention most people reserve for things with heartbeats. She also planted sunflowers, just because she liked them. Even there, she allowed herself the sunflowers. They lived carefully, not miserably. There is a difference, and it matters. Social security. No rent, no mortgage. Tom's old Ford with 201,000 miles that hesitated on cold mornings, but ran. Debbie bought groceries with a precision that had become almost architectural. She knew, within a few cents, what everything cost. They were not happy exactly. Not at first. But they were not broken either. And then Tom started digging. It began practically. The ground at the northeast corner had been soft and spongy since they arrived, and after a heavy rain in early May, Tom noticed the footing of the house's northeast wall had sunk almost 2 inches. If he let it go, the wall would crack. If the wall cracked, everything would follow. So he bought 4 concrete blocks and a bag of ready mix and started digging to expose the footing. He dug about 18 inches before the shovel hit something that was not soil and was not rock. He knelt. He cleared the soil with his hands. Careful, the way you would be if you suspected something, even without knowing what. What he found was a fissure, a crack in the substrate, roughly 6 inches wide, running east to west. From it came warmth. Not the warmth of composting material, not a sewage line, a clean warmth, a mineral warmth, and with it, a faint smell, slightly sulphurous, the way certain hot springs smell. Tom sat back on his heels in the dirt. He looked at the fissure for a long time. Then he went inside. "Deb," he said. Debbie was rolling out dough at the small table. Flour was cheap, bread was not. "What?" "Come look at something." She came and looked. She crouched over the fissure with floury hands on her knees and felt the warmth rising. "Geothermal?" she said. "I don't know what it is yet. But it's warm." "It's warm." She looked up at him. "Don't tell anyone," she said. Tom looked back at her. Something passed between them that was not quite a plan yet, but was the shape a plan makes before it forms. "Not yet," he agreed. Over the following weeks, Tom dug more carefully, following the fissure eastward. He did this in the early morning, before the light got high enough for anyone on the access road to see much. He covered his excavations with plywood at the end of each session. He was not by nature a secretive man. But he had grown up in a family that had been taken advantage of in small and large ways for generations, and something in his bones understood. When you find something that could change your situation, you understand it completely before you show it to anyone. What he confirmed, over 6 weeks of careful work: a hydrothermal vent, geothermally heated groundwater rising through a fracture in the limestone beneath them, consistently warm, mineral-rich, and running east in a channel that widened as it went. Harlan County had no known hot springs, no geothermal designation. A county geological survey from 20 years ago had noted a possible subsurface thermal anomaly in eastern sector, and then moved on, because there had been no money and no one had cared. The eastern sector was exactly where they were. Tom spent weeks at the public library reading water rights law. What he found was this. In their state, thermal water rights belonged to the surface property owner, provided the source had never been formally claimed or mapped. Because the county had only noted it and forgotten it, and no prior owner had ever filed a claim, the water right now belonged entirely to whoever held the deed to this land. $15. That deed had cost $15. Tom did not whoop. He did not celebrate. He sat at the table, quiet for a long time, and then told Debbie everything, carefully, completely. She listened without interrupting. "So, what do we do?" she said. "We wait," Tom said. "We improve the land. We file the water right quietly, and we wait." "For what?" "For the county to need us." And in the meantime, the children called. They called the way people call when the call is more for them than for you. Brief, slightly too cheerful, full of their own lives and light on questions about yours. Julio called on Sunday afternoons, usually from his car. 4 to 8 minutes. He asked if they were doing okay and getting enough to eat. The questions adults ask elderly parents when they want to believe everything is fine without actually finding out. Tom always said, "We're fine," which was true, but not in the way Julio imagined. Marina visited once, in the second year. She sat at the small folding table, drank Debbie's coffee, and looked around with an expression she was trying to make neutral, but which was actually closer to relief. Relief that her parents were alive and functional and not demanding anything of her. "You fixed it up a bit. It actually looks cozy." "We try," Debbie said. Marina said, "Dad, I've been meaning to talk to you about senior living options. I did some research and there are some really nice places that aren't as expensive as—" "We're fine here," Tom said. "Dad, you're almost 70. This is—" she gestured at the room. "This is a lot for two people your age. We manage," Debbie said. "Marina." Tom's voice was even. Not angry, just final, like a door closing. "We are fine here. The conversation isn't necessary." She stayed 50 minutes. She hugged them both at the door, the relieved kind of hug, and drove away. Tom and Debbie stood at the door and watched her go. Then Tom went inside and put the kettle on. "She didn't notice the back," Debbie said. "No," Tom said. "She didn't even ask to see the back." "No." Because in the back, behind the $15 house, screened by the pines and invisible from the road, Tom had, by the third year, done something remarkable. He had diverted a portion of the thermal water into a shallow pool, 8 feet by 12, with a gravel bed and a simple overflow system. The water held steady at 101 degrees Fahrenheit. Around it, he had built a cedar deck with wood he had sourced and milled himself, rough but solid, with a small bench on the eastern side, where you could sit and watch the morning light come through the pines. It was, in its quiet way, extraordinary. Marina had not asked to see the back. She had not asked anything, really. She had come to check a box and gone home. The city of Harlan, not a large city, not a small town, but the kind of in-between place that has a main street with 2 empty storefronts for every occupied one, and a mayor who has been mayor long enough to believe that the job is permanently his, had a development problem. The problem had a name, the Eastern Corridor Project. It had been in planning for 4 years. It was, depending on who you asked, either a vital infrastructure investment or a desperate attempt by Mayor Gerald Holt to leave something behind that people would name after him. The project involved the construction of a regional wellness and thermal tourism complex, a concept that had gained considerable traction after a geological consulting firm, hired at considerable public expense, had confirmed what Tom had already known for 3 years, that the eastern sector of Harlan County sat on top of a significant and commercially viable hydrothermal water source. The complex, as designed, would include a thermal spa, a medical wellness center, a small hotel, and a conference facility. Projections showed it generating $14 million in annual revenue and 400 jobs within 5 years. State funding had been secured. A private hospitality developer from out of state had committed. The groundbreaking was scheduled. There was just one problem. one small, stubborn, $15-shaped problem. The hydrothermal source, the source that the expensive geological firm had mapped and the state had funded and the developer had committed to, did not originate in the county's projected development zone. It originated in the northeast corner of a 1.4-acre lot on the old Harlan Access Road, from a fissure that had been discovered 3 years earlier by a 68-year-old retired highway worker with calloused hands and a methodical mind and a piece of paper that said he owned the land. The water right had been filed quietly 18 months ago through a water resources attorney in the next county over, a woman named Ruth Egan who specialized in obscure rural water claims and who had read Tom's documentation with increasing attention before saying, "Mr. Haverford, this is a valid claim. This is a very valid claim. Who else knows about this?" "Just you," Tom had said. "And my wife." "Keep it that way," Ruth had said, "until I file." By the time Mayor Holt's development office discovered the water right, 6 months after it had been quietly filed and approved with no public notice, because nobody had been looking, the Eastern Corridor project was committed. Money had been spent. Contracts had been signed. A groundbreaking ceremony with a local TV crew had already been scheduled and then quietly postponed. The mayor sent a real estate broker first. Her name was Carol Finch. She drove up in a clean white SUV wearing a blazer, carrying a leather portfolio, and she smiled the smile of a person who has sold many difficult things to many reluctant people and found that a certain kind of brightness generally worked. Tom met her at the gate. He had installed a gate, simple pipe on hinges, nothing dramatic, and he listened to her explain who she was and why she was there and what the county had in mind, and then he said, "We're not interested in selling." "Oh." Carol's brightness dimmed slightly but professionally. "Mr. Haverford, I understand your hesitation, but I want to make sure you're aware that the county is prepared to be very generous. The assessed value of the land is—" "I know what the assessed value is," Tom said. "The assessed value is what the county decides it is for tax purposes. The value of the water right is something else entirely, and we're not interested in selling." Carol left. 2 weeks later, a county assessor came, and then a deputy planning commissioner, and then the county's legal counsel, who sent a letter that used the phrase public interest 4 times and eminent domain once, at the end, in a paragraph clearly designed to be read as a threat without being formally won. Tom gave the letter to Ruth Egan. Ruth sent back a response so thorough and so comprehensively documented that the county legal counsel apparently forwarded it to the mayor with a single-sentence note that read, "We have a problem." The problem was this: the eminent domain threat was legally hollow. The water right had been properly claimed under state law. Thermal water rights in this state were classified as mineral rights, and mineral rights required a separate proceeding to condemn, a proceeding that would be slow, expensive, publicly embarrassing, and uncertain of success, particularly given that the source was not on county land and had never been publicly designated or mapped before Tom found it. You cannot condemn what you never officially knew existed. You cannot take what you never acknowledged was there. Mayor Gerald Holt came himself on a Tuesday in October, in the 3rd year after Tom and Debbie had moved to the $15 house. He came in a county sedan with a driver, wearing a charcoal grey suit and a tie that was slightly too wide for current fashion, and he walked up the path to the front of the house. Tom had paved it with salvaged brick, neat and level. And he stood at the door and he asked, politely, but with a barely contained quality of stress that sat under his politeness like water under pressure, if he could come in and talk. Tom said, "We can talk out here." He gestured to 2 chairs on the small porch. "My wife will bring coffee." The mayor sat in one of the chairs, wooden, solid, made by Tom's own hands from material he had milled himself, and he looked at the house and the garden and the cedar deck visible beyond the pines, and he had the look of a man recalculating something. Debbie brought coffee in 2 mugs. She did not bring a 3rd. She went back inside. Mayor Holt said, "Mr. Haverford, Tom, I want to be direct with you." Tom sipped his coffee. "Good. This project is important to this county, to real people, workers, families, The thermal wellness complex is going to create jobs and revenue that this community needs badly. I think, if you're honest with yourself, you know that, Tom said. I know that. Then you understand why I'm here. We need this land. We need the water rights. The state developer needs to break ground by spring, or the funding allocation expires. That sounds like a planning problem, Tom said. The mayor's jaw tightened slightly. Tom, I'm prepared to offer you $100,000 for the land and the water right assignment. Tom looked at his coffee. The water right alone is worth more than that, he said. Ruth Egan's valuation puts it at between 3 and 4 million in projected access value. I'm sure your developer's team has a similar number. A beat, the mayor said. 500,000. Tom said, we're not interested in selling. 1 million. Tom set his mug down on the arm of the chair. The mayor watched him. Mr. Holt, Tom said, I appreciate that you came in person. I want to tell you something, and I want you to hear it correctly. He looked directly at the mayor. We were put on this land by our children. They put us here because they needed money, and they needed us somewhere, anywhere, that wasn't their problem. This was the cheapest thing they could find, $15. They thought they were parking us somewhere to wait. The mayor said nothing. What they did not think, Tom continued, was that we would work, or that we would look, or that we would find something and know what to do with it. That is a mistake people make about old people. They stop seeing you as someone who might be paying attention. He picked up his coffee again. We are paying attention. We have been paying attention for 3 years. And the answer is still no. Mayor Holt sat for a moment. Then he said, Can I ask why? If not the money. Because a sale is not the only option, Tom said. And because I'm not finished thinking about what the right option is. When I am finished, you'll be the first person I call. But I'm not finished yet. The mayor stood. He looked at the house, the repaired roof, the salvaged brick path, the garden, the cedar deck, the pines. And something in his expression shifted from negotiation into something more complicated. Not respect, exactly, but the beginning of it. How long? He said. Tom said. A few months. The mayor nodded. He went back to his car. Tom sat on his porch and finished his coffee in the October light. The news broke in December, not from Tom or Debbie, who had not spoken publicly about any of it. It broke because a reporter from the regional paper had been covering the Eastern Corridor project's repeated groundbreaking postponements and had finally gotten hold of the county legal counsel's filing history. And from there, it was not difficult to trace. The water right claim, the property address, the $15 auction lot, the name Tom Haverford. The story ran on a Thursday morning under the headline, Elderly Couple's $15 property holds key to county's 40 Medentals development. By Friday morning, it had been picked up by 3 regional television stations. By Saturday afternoon, it was on the national feeds. By Sunday evening, Julio called. Not from his car, from home, sitting still, in a way Tom had not heard in his son's voice in years. Dad, Julio said. Dad, why didn't you tell us? Tom said, Tell you what, Julio? About the water. About all of this. About what's been happening down there. Dad, we could have helped. We could have... Julio. Yeah, you could have helped 3 years ago. You didn't need to know about a water right to help. You needed to want to. A long silence. That's not fair, Julio said, quietly. The way people say things when they know they are not actually an argument. Maybe not, Tom said. Come visit if you want. I'll show you what we've built. Marina arrived the following Saturday without calling ahead. She drove the newer car, and she brought flowers. Expensive ones, from a florist, not a gas station. And she hugged Debbie in the doorway with a suddenness that seemed to surprise even herself. Mom, she said, I'm so sorry. Debbie held her for a moment. Then she stepped back and looked at her daughter and said plainly, I know you are. Come in and have something to eat. She did not say, it's fine. She did not say, it doesn't matter. She did not hand Marina absolution for free, but she did let her in. Because Debbie had always been, at the core of her, more interested in what was possible going forward than in extracting perfect repentance for what had passed. Still, she did not make it easy. Easy was not the same as possible. Julio came 2 weeks later, also without calling ahead. They had not yet learned the simple courtesy of a phone call before appearing, and he sat at the kitchen table and he cried, which Tom had not seen him do since he was 19 years old. Tom sat across from him and waited. When Julio was done, he said, "I don't know how you can even look at me." Tom said, "You're my son. That doesn't go anywhere. But it also doesn't erase anything. Both of those things are true at the same time and they don't need to be resolved right now. We have time." Julio nodded. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. Then, because he was still who he was, he said, "Dad, the money. If you sell, with a proper legal structure, we could set up trusts. We could—" "Julio," Debbie said, from the other side of the room, without looking up from the sweater she was knitting. "Yeah. Not today." He stopped. "Okay," he said. "Okay, not today." What neither child knew yet, what Tom and Debbie had decided together in the small kitchen of the $15 house on a November night after Ruth Egan had laid out all the options on the table, was that they had already decided. They were not going to sell. Not outright. What they had negotiated, through Ruth Egan, in a series of meetings with the county and the state developer that nobody had yet reported on because nobody had yet been told, was a long-term access agreement. Not a sale. The water right would not be transferred. It would be licensed under a 60-year agreement with an access fee structure that gave Tom and Debbie a guaranteed income for the remainder of their lives, and after them established a community wellness endowment. The endowment's board included 3 seats, one for the county, one for a local non-profit that ran after-school programs, and one, held in permanent trust, for a scholarship fund for first-generation college students from Harlan County. The terms had been Tom's idea. Ruth Egan had looked at him over her reading glasses and said, "You know, most people would just take the money." Tom had said, "I've spent 34 years watching roads get built. Every road gets used by people who didn't build it. That seems right to me. That's how things should work." The access agreement gave them, per year, an amount that was more money than Tom had ever made in a year of highway work. Not dramatically more. Enough. Solidly, unshakably enough. The children had no access to it. The agreement was structured, on Ruth Egan's firm advice and Tom's firmer insistence, so that no family member could petition for or claim any portion of the income or the trust assets. It was not punitive. It was not designed to hurt Julio and Marina. It was designed to be permanent and to be clean and to make sure that what Tom and Debbie had built, with their own hands, on a piece of land that had cost $15, would go on after them as something larger than a family argument about inheritance. Julio found out, eventually through Ruth Egan's office, that the trust terms prevented any family claim. He called Tom. He was not entirely able to hide that he was hurt. Tom listened to him. Then he said, "Julio, you and Marina made a decision 3 years ago about what our future was worth. We're making a decision now about what this water is worth. Both of those decisions belong to the person who made them." Another silence. "I know," Julio said, quietly. "I know, Dad." The groundbreaking for the Eastern Corridor Thermal Wellness Complex happened in March, 4 months later than originally scheduled, in mud and early spring light, with a crew of county officials and state representatives and the developer's team and a few dozen local people who had read the story and come to see what the fuss was about. Tom and Debbie were invited. They went, briefly. Tom wore his good jacket, and Debbie wore a blue dress she had mended at the hem the night before. Mayor Holt shook Tom's hand with both of his, the way politicians shake hands with people they are genuinely grateful to. "Thank you," the mayor said. Tom said, "Don't waste it." The mayor laughed, a short surprise sound, and said, "We won't." Tom and Debbie left the groundbreaking after 40 minutes. They drove home down the old access road. They parked the Ford, which now had 231,000 miles on it, and still hesitated on cold mornings. And they walked around to the back of the house. The pool was steaming in the cold March air, the way it always did when the outside temperature dropped. The cedar deck was grey now, weathered, exactly the way good cedar goes when it's been outside long enough. The pines moved in the wind. Tom sat on the bench on the east side. Debbie sat beside him. She took his hand, the wide, calloused, permanently marked hand, and held it in both of hers. They sat like that for a long time, not talking, not planning, not explaining anything to anyone, just sitting in the steam and the pine smell and the cold, clear light of a March morning, on land that had cost $15, that nobody had thought was worth anything, that two old people with enough patience and enough stubbornness and enough love for each other to stay afloat had turned into something that would outlast all of them. The steam rose, the pines moved, and in the house behind them, in the $15 house with its repaired roof and its salvaged brick path and its insulated walls and its two mugs still on the kitchen table, the air was warm, not from any heater, not from anything bought or given, from the ground, just from the ground where it had always been, waiting for someone to look.